The evening sky had just started turning gold and pink when a tall, quiet teenager named Caleb walked out of the school gym, his basketball tucked under his arm and his bag slung over his shoulder. The air smelled like rain, and the streetlights were slowly flickering on one by one. Caleb had stayed after practice to help clean up, something he often did without being asked. He liked staying behind when the school got quiet. It helped him think. He slipped his earbuds in, started his favorite playlist, and began the short walk home. It wasn't far. Maybe 15 minutes through a calm suburban street lined with trimmed lawns and parked cars. Most of the houses had porch lights on. He bounced the basketball softly against the sidewalk in rhythm with the beat. A police car rolled past him once, slow enough for him to notice. He didn't think much of it. They patrolled the area often, but a minute later he heard the sound again, tires crunching behind him. The car had turned around. It pulled up beside him, window sliding down. "Hey, kid," one of the officers called. "Hold up a second." Caleb paused and pulled his earbuds out. "Yes, sir?" he asked politely. "You live around here?" the officer asked. "Yeah, just a few blocks away," Caleb replied, pointing down the street. "What's your name?" "Caleb." The other officer, sitting in the passenger seat, leaned forward. "You match the description of someone we're looking for." Caleb frowned slightly. "I'm just coming from basketball practice," he said, holding up his gym bag. "You can check my school ID." "Slow down," the driver said sharply. "We'll ask the questions." Caleb's chest tightened a little. He'd been taught what to do in these moments. Stay calm, stay respectful, keep your hands visible. He took a slow breath and nodded. "Okay." The first officer stepped out of the car, walking around to stand a few feet away from him. "What's in the bag?" he asked. "My shoes, clothes, and water bottle," Caleb answered, unzipping it slightly to show him. "Why are you walking alone this late?" "It's only 7:30, Caleb replied quietly. The officer gave a short laugh. "Smart kid, huh?" Caleb didn't know how to respond. He tried not to look nervous, but his stomach twisted. The second officer got out too, standing near the back of the patrol car. The blue lights weren't on, but the presence alone made the street feel heavy. Cars passed by slowly. A woman walking her dog across the street glanced over, slowing her pace. Caleb tried to smile at her as if to say everything was fine, but his lips wouldn't move. "Can I see your ID?" the officer asked again. "Sure," Caleb said softly. He reached for his pocket slowly, moving his hand carefully so they could see. "It's in here. Hands where I can see them." The second officer barked. Caleb froze, his fingers stopping mid-air. My wallet's right here," he said, voice trembling a little. The first officer gestured. "It's fine, let him." Caleb took it out, his hands shaking slightly. He held up the ID for them to see. The younger officer took it and stared at it longer than necessary, then looked Caleb up and down again. "This address doesn't match where we saw the suspect," he muttered. "I told you," Caleb said gently. "I live right there." He pointed again. The officer didn't seem to care. "You in any kind of trouble before?" "No, sir. You sure?" "Yes, sir." Caleb swallowed hard. His throat was dry and he could feel every beat of his heart. He looked down at his basketball rolling slightly toward the curb. He wanted to grab it, but he didn't dare move. Across the street, the woman with the dog was now standing still, phone in hand. Caleb wondered if she was recording. "Look," he said softly. "You can call my mom. Quiet," the older officer interrupted. "We'll decide what to do." Caleb bit his lip and stayed silent. The air felt colder now. Inside the patrol car, the radio crackled with some routine dispatch. The officers ignored it. They were focused on him. "Mind if we check your bag?" one of them asked. Caleb hesitated. "Do I have to?" The younger officer raised his eyebrows. "You got something to hide?" "No, sir, Then you shouldn't mind." Caleb slowly handed the bag over. They looked through it, just sneakers, a towel, and his notebook. The officer flipped through the pages, then tossed it back at him. "All right," the driver said finally. "You can go." Caleb blinked, stunned. "That's it?" "You can go," the officer repeated, already turning away. Caleb bent to pick up his basketball, trying to calm his breathing. But as he did, the second officer suddenly said, "Hold on. Let's run that ID again." The first sighed but nodded. "Fine, stay right here." Caleb's heart sank again. He hadn't done anything wrong, but somehow he felt like he was on trial for just existing on that sidewalk. The officer typed something into his onboard computer. Seconds turned into minutes. The flashing cursor on the screen reflected in the windshield. Caleb stood silently, eyes fixed on the pavement. He could see the faint outline of his reflection in the car window. Tall, thin, hoodie pulled tight around his face. Maybe that's all they saw, he thought. Not a student, not an athlete. Just a shape that looked like trouble. The woman across the street crossed her arms. Another man had come out of his house now, watching too. The tension was growing. Finally, the officer in the car frowned. "The ID checks out," he muttered to his partner. The other shrugged. "Still looks like him." Caleb didn't even ask who him was anymore. He just wanted to go home. "Can I please leave now?" he asked softly. "Wait," the younger one said. "You said your mom's home?" "Yes, what'd she do?" Caleb hesitated. "She works for the government." The officer raised an eyebrow. "Government, huh?" "Doing what?" "She's a special agent," Caleb said, almost whispering. The older officer gave a small smirk. Right, Caleb didn't argue. He just wanted the moment to end. He looked down the street toward his house. It wasn't far. Maybe if he started walking, they'd let him go. But as soon as he took one small step, the younger officer spoke again. "Stay where you are." Caleb stopped immediately. "Yes, sir." The officer's radio crackled again. This time, Caleb caught part of the voice. A description of a suspect wearing dark clothing last seen near a shopping center several miles away. Caleb didn't fit the age, the height, or the location, but the officers seemed too caught up in the idea to notice. One of them finally sighed and looked frustrated. "Let's just take him down to the station, sort it out there." Caleb's stomach dropped. "What, why? I didn't do anything." "Lower your voice," the officer snapped. "But, hands behind your back." Caleb's heart was pounding so loud he could barely hear himself think. "Please, sir, I didn't—" The officer's radio buzzed again. A woman's voice this time. Caleb couldn't make out the words, but the officer did. He froze slightly, listening. The voice repeated something. His eyes flicked toward Caleb, then back to his partner. "What was that?" the other officer asked. The first one didn't answer. He just looked uneasy now. Caleb stood completely still, not sure what was happening. The officer leaned toward the radio, speaking into it quietly. Caleb caught bits of it. "Yes. Teenage male. Yes, that's him. She's on her way." Caleb's breath caught. She, then he realized. His mom. She must have tracked his phone. The officers glanced at each other. Their confident expressions began to fade. One of them shifted uncomfortably, tapping his fingers on his belt. The sound of an engine came from down the street. A black SUV turning the corner fast, headlights cutting through the dusk. It pulled up right behind the patrol car. Caleb didn't move. The door opened and a woman stepped out. She walked calmly, her coat swinging behind her, her ID badge gleaming under the streetlight. Her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Which one of you called about detaining my son?" she asked firmly. The officers froze. Caleb felt the tension shift completely. The woman stepped closer, showing her badge clearly. The letters on it were unmistakable. "Federal agent," one officer whispered under his breath. Caleb didn't know whether to cry or laugh. Relief flooded through him so fast his knees nearly buckled. His mother turned to him, checking him from head to toe to make sure he was okay. Then she faced the officers again, her tone even and steady. "I'm going to need both of your badge numbers," she said quietly. "Right now." The officers exchanged a helpless glance. The street was silent except for the distant hum of traffic. Even the woman across the street with her dog didn't move. Everyone could feel it, the sudden flip of power, the weight of realization settling in. Caleb didn't say a word. He just watched his mother, her calm strength standing taller than any flashing light could. The officers who moments ago questioned him now looked completely still, unsure what to do next. And for the first time that night, Caleb finally felt safe. The night air was quiet now, but the tension on that street was so thick you could almost feel it pressing on your chest. Caleb stood next to his mother, his hands trembling even though he tried to hide it. The flashing lights from the patrol car washed over their faces, turning everything blue and white. The two officers who had stopped him looked frozen. They weren't sure what to say. The one who had done most of the talking earlier opened his mouth once, then closed it again. His partner's face was pale, like he'd just realized something terrible. Caleb's mother, still calm, took one small step closer. She wasn't yelling or waving her badge around. Her voice was low, steady, and carried more power than shouting ever could. "You stopped my son," she said quietly, "and you detained him without cause. You questioned a minor without parental consent. I want your names and badge numbers." The older officer finally spoke. "Ma'am, we were only—" "Badge numbers," she repeated. Her tone didn't rise, but it cut through the air like a blade. The officer swallowed hard and slowly read his out loud. His partner did the same, his voice barely above a whisper. Caleb watched, still half in disbelief. His mother didn't even glance away as she typed their numbers into her phone. "Now," she said after a pause, "you can explain why you felt the need to stop a teenager walking home from school." The younger officer tried to gather his thoughts. "We had a call earlier, ma'am." A suspect description came through. "Young male, dark clothing, backpack. You were just what?" She interrupted, using a broad description as a reason to stop anyone who looked convenient. The officer opened his mouth, but no words came out. The crowd that had gathered earlier hadn't moved. Some people were filming. Others just stood quietly, watching this unexpected shift in power. Caleb stood close to his mother now, the warmth of her presence slowly calming him down. She placed a hand on his shoulder without looking away from the officers. It was a simple touch, but it was everything. "You had no probable cause," she continued. "You searched his bag, questioned him, and raised your voice. He's 16. He has rights. Ma'am, we didn't mean—" "You never do," she said softly. For a moment, no one spoke. Only the faint hum of the police radio broke the silence. Then the sound of another vehicle pulling up filled the air. A supervisor had arrived, a sergeant with graying hair and tired eyes. He got out of his car, clearly sensing the tension. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking from the officers to her badge, then to Caleb. "I'll tell you what's going on," she said calmly. "Your officers detained my son without reason. I'm Special Agent Harris with the Federal Division, and I intend to file a report." The sergeant's eyes widened slightly. "Agent Harris," he said quickly, "let's talk about this. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." She gave a tight smile. "I'm sure there has." He motioned for the two officers to step aside, and they did, quietly avoiding eye contact. The sergeant tried to defuse the situation, speaking in a lower tone now. "I understand you're upset," she cut him off. "Upset isn't the word. I'm angry, but not just because they stopped my son. I'm angry because this happens all the time. To kids who don't have a parent in law enforcement to protect them. You know it and I know it." The sergeant exhaled slowly. He didn't argue. He couldn't. Caleb looked between them, unsure what to do or say. He'd never seen his mother like this before. Calm, yes. Tough, always. But this was different. She was a storm wrapped in stillness. "I want this documented," she continued. "Body cam footage. Radio logs. Every bit of it. I know procedure and I expect accountability." The sergeant nodded reluctantly. "Of course. We'll cooperate." "Good." Caleb glanced at the crowd. The woman with the dog was still there, filming discreetly. A few neighbors had come out from their porches. He could tell they were on his mother's side, people nodding quietly, whispering things like, "Good for her." One of the officers tried to step forward, maybe to apologize, but the sergeant stopped him with a look. "Not now," he murmured. Caleb's mother turned to her son. "Are you okay?" He nodded, though his voice was barely a whisper. "Yeah. Did they touch you?" "No, ma'am." She gave a short breath of relief. "All right. We're going home." The sergeant tried one more time. "Agent Harris, I promise we'll handle this internally." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You will. But I'll still be filing an official complaint. You can expect a call from my office tomorrow." With that, she placed her hand gently on Caleb's back and led him away from the flashing lights. As they walked toward her car, the night felt oddly still, as if even the air respected her authority. When they got inside, Caleb sat silently for a long time. His mother didn't start the engine right away. She just looked at him, her face softening now that the adrenaline had started to fade. "You did good," she said quietly. He looked up. "I didn't do anything." "Exactly," she replied. "You stayed calm. That's all you needed to do." He looked out the window, eyes stinging a little. "They didn't believe me," he whispered. "They looked at me like I was already guilty." She reached over and took his hand. "I know, and I wish I could tell you it was the last time you'd ever feel that." But the truth is, you handled it better than most adults would. Caleb nodded slowly. I was scared. I was too, she said softly. But I wasn't going to show them that. They sat in silence for a few seconds. Then she added, I've spent years teaching people like them about fairness, about judgment, about responsibility. And still, this happens. Even in our own neighborhood. Caleb glanced at her. Do you think they'll get in trouble? Maybe, she said. But what matters is that you know your worth. They saw what they wanted to see, not who you are. Don't ever let anyone's fear or ignorance decide how you see yourself. He nodded again, staring at the faint reflection of his face in the glass. It's not fair. No, she agreed. It isn't, but that's why people like me and someday, maybe people like you, keep fighting to make it fair. The rain started lightly tapping on the windshield, small drops running down like tiny trails of silver. Caleb leaned his head back, trying to process everything that had happened. His chest still felt tight, but slowly the pressure began to fade. His mother started the engine, but instead of heading straight home, she drove a few blocks to a quiet park. The basketball courts were empty now, puddles forming on the asphalt. She parked near the edge and turned off the car again. I used to come here when I was your age, she said softly. Whenever I felt angry or scared. Caleb looked at her. Did anyone ever stop you? She smiled sadly. Yes, more than once. Back then I didn't have a badge. I had to prove myself 100 times over just to be treated like everyone else. He didn't know what to say to that. The rain got heavier, tapping faster on the roof. She continued, That's why I do what I do. So maybe one day another kid won't have to explain why he's just walking home. Caleb turned toward her. Mom, yes? Thanks for coming. Her expression softened. There's nowhere else I'd ever be. He smiled faintly, and for a moment everything felt lighter. She reached over and ruffled his hair the way she used to when he was younger. You scared me tonight, she admitted quietly. I scared me too, he said with a half laugh. That made her smile. The kind of smile that said she was both proud and heartbroken all at once. After a while, she started driving again. The streetlights passed by in a blur of orange and gold, the rain reflecting off the road like tiny rivers of light. At home, she made him some tea even though he said he didn't want any. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, watching him sip it slowly. I'll handle the paperwork tomorrow, she said. You don't need to worry about that part. He nodded. Will people know? Probably, she said. Someone was recording, Caleb sighed. Great, she gave a small laugh. Don't worry. You didn't do anything wrong. If anything, people might learn something from this. He looked up. What if they don't? Then we keep reminding them, she said softly. That's how change starts. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. Caleb leaned back, feeling exhaustion settle over him. It had been just another evening that turned into something he'd never forget. Before heading to bed, he paused at the doorway. Mom, yes? Were you scared? When you saw me there? Her eyes met his. More than I can ever tell you. He nodded and went upstairs. Downstairs, she sat alone for a moment, staring at the file on her desk. She picked up her phone and started typing a report, clear, detailed, professional. But her hand shook slightly as she wrote the part that said subject detained without cause. It wasn't just another case. This one was personal. Outside, the rain eased. The quiet hum of the city returned. Upstairs, Caleb finally fell asleep, though his dreams were uneasy. But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. His mother had turned fear into strength that night. And even though he'd felt powerless for a moment, he'd witnessed what real power looked like when used to protect, not to control. Morning sunlight slipped through the kitchen blinds, soft and golden, landing on the quiet breakfast table. Caleb sat there pushing cereal around his bowl, not really eating. His mother stood by the counter, her phone in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. She had already been up for hours. The house felt different that morning, heavier somehow. The events from the night before were still hanging in the air like a shadow. Every sound felt sharper. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the quiet rustle of pages from the file she was reading. Did you sleep? She finally asked without looking up. A little, Caleb said softly. She nodded. You have school today. Are you feeling up to it? He hesitated. I guess so. She looked up at him, her eyes calm but searching. You don't have to if you're not ready. I'm fine, he said quickly, though he wasn't. She could see that, but she didn't push. Instead, she walked over and set her coffee down. "Listen," she began carefully. "What happened last night wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." Caleb nodded but didn't meet her eyes. "I know." She reached out and touched his arm gently. "Then say it like you believe it." He looked up, eyes tired. "It just felt like I didn't matter," he said quietly. "Like no matter what I said, they'd already decided who I was." Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him everything would change so that people would learn, that things like this would stop happening. But she couldn't lie to him. "I know," she said softly. "And that's exactly why I'm not letting this go." Caleb watched her pick up her file folder, the same one she'd started the night before. She'd already printed out statements, saved screenshots of the video that had surfaced online, and listed badge numbers and times. Her tone was calm, but her movements were sharp and precise. He finally asked, "Are you really going to report them?" "Yes," she said firmly. "And I'm going to make sure they're held accountable." "What if they say it was a mistake?" She looked at him. "Then they'll learn what a mistake costs." She drove him to school that morning, even though he usually walked. The drive was quiet, both of them lost in thought. As they pulled up to the parking lot, a few students were already whispering. Caleb noticed them looking his way, not in a bad way, but with curiosity. Someone must have seen the video, he sighed. Guess everyone knows. His mother looked over at him. "Let them talk. You didn't do anything wrong." He nodded, but still felt uneasy. Before he stepped out, she stopped him. "Remember what I told you. You are not what they think you are. You decide who you are." He gave a small smile. "I'll try." She smiled back, though her eyes looked worried. "That's enough for now." When he walked into the hallway, it was clear the story had spread. A few kids came up to him, asking if it was true that the cops had stopped him for no reason. He kept his answers short. "Yeah, it happened." One girl said, "Your mom's a legend. She showed up like a boss." He chuckled lightly. "Yeah, she did." But inside, he still felt that same strange mix of embarrassment and relief. He didn't want to be known for what had happened. He wanted to be known for something else. Basketball, grades, anything but this. At home, his mother was already on her laptop, sending emails and reviewing files. She spoke to her supervisor, explaining that she needed to take the morning off to handle a personal legal matter. Her boss understood. Everyone in her division respected her. She was known for her professionalism and calm under pressure. By mid-afternoon, she was sitting across from a police department investigator in a quiet conference room. She had brought everything: the video, timestamps, her notes. The investigator, a composed woman in a gray suit, listened carefully. "So you're saying the officers detained your son without cause?" "Yes," she replied, sliding over the evidence. "No probable cause. No call for backup. No guardian contact before questioning. He's 16. This was mishandled from the start." The investigator nodded, writing things down. "And you believe bias was involved?" She met her eyes directly. "I don't believe." "I know." The room was quiet for a moment. Then the investigator asked, "Would you like to pursue disciplinary action?" "Yes," she said. "And I'd also like to discuss community training. If it happened to my son, it can happen to any child." The investigator nodded again. "Understood. We'll review everything and contact you soon." As she left the building, she felt both drained and focused. She wasn't just doing this for Caleb. She was doing it for every parent who had ever feared for their child in moments like that. That evening, Caleb sat on the couch doing homework, the news playing quietly in the background. A headline flashed across the screen. "Local teen detained without cause, a mother revealed as federal agent." His stomach dropped. "Mom?" He called out. She came into the room. "What is it?" He pointed to the TV. The reporter was talking about the video that had been uploaded the night before. It showed just enough to tell the story. Him standing by the car, scared, and her arriving calmly, showing her badge. It didn't show faces clearly, but it was obvious enough. Her face stayed calm. "It was bound to come out," she said. "People at school already saw it," he murmured. She sat beside him. "Then maybe they'll learn something." He turned to her. "I don't want to be in the news." She smiled gently. "Neither do I. But sometimes the right story helps the right people pay attention." He didn't respond. The idea of being a story didn't feel right to him. It wasn't something he'd chosen. The next day, a reporter showed up outside their house, camera in hand. His mother stepped outside, calm and polite. She didn't say much, just a short statement. Yes, the incident happened. Yes, my son was stopped unfairly. But this isn't about me. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. She refused further questions. She didn't want attention. She wanted action. Inside, Caleb watched from the window. It felt strange seeing his mother like that, standing so strong, so composed, while the world suddenly cared about their story. He realized she wasn't just protecting him. She was teaching him what strength looked like. That evening, she got a call from the police chief himself. The conversation was polite but serious. He apologized for the incident, saying it did not reflect the department's values. "I appreciate your words," she replied evenly, "but apologies don't change patterns. Training does." He agreed to meet with her privately to discuss reform programs. She accepted on one condition, that youth voices be included in those discussions. After the call, she found Caleb in his room, writing something in a notebook. "What are you working on?" she asked. He hesitated, "Just trying to write down what happened." "I don't want to forget," she smiled softly. "That's good. Writing helps." He looked up. "Do you think people will actually listen?" She sat on the edge of his bed. "Maybe not everyone. But even if one person learned something, it's worth it." He nodded slowly. "I still don't get why they thought I looked like someone else." She sighed. "Because sometimes people see what they expect to see, not what's real." That stayed with him. Days passed. The story began to fade from the headlines, replaced by new ones, but in their home, the memory didn't fade. His mother kept in touch with the investigator, pushing for accountability. One afternoon, when Caleb came home from school, she told him quietly, "The officers have been suspended pending review." He didn't know how to feel. "Does that mean it's over?" She shook her head. "No, it just means it's being taken seriously." That's a start. That night, the two of them sat outside on the porch, the evening air cool and peaceful. Fireflies blinked in the grass. "Do you ever get tired?" he asked suddenly. "Of what?" "Having to fight all the time. For people to do the right thing." She smiled faintly. "Every day. But I do it anyway. Because if we don't speak up, nothing changes." Caleb looked at her quietly. For the first time, he realized how much she carried. The strength, the patience, the constant need to stand tall even when she was tired. "Do you think I'll ever be that strong?" he asked. She looked at him, eyes warm. "You already are." He didn't believe it, not yet. But her words settled somewhere deep inside him, like a small seed waiting to grow. The night air was calm. Somewhere down the street, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, but it didn't make him flinch this time. Not like before. For the first time since that night, he felt something new. Not fear, not anger, but purpose. He didn't know what he'd do with it yet, but he knew he wanted to be part of whatever change his mother was fighting for. She looked at him and smiled softly. "You know, Caleb, sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just standing your ground quietly when the world expects you to back down." He nodded. "Like you did," she laughed lightly. "Like we both did." And as the evening light faded, mother and son sat together in silence. Not broken anymore, but stronger than before, bound by a night that had changed everything, and a quiet promise that they would never stop standing tall for what was right. When the supervisor arrived at the scene, the flashing red and blue lights still reflected off every car window on the quiet street. A few neighbors stood at a distance, whispering, trying to understand what was happening. Jordan stood close to his mother, his shoulders still tense, though her presence gave him a small sense of safety he hadn't felt moments ago. Danielle, standing tall in her navy suit, held her badge in one hand, her calmness more powerful than any raised voice could be. The supervisor, a man in his 50s with kind but tired eyes, stepped out of his vehicle and quickly read the situation. He could sense something had gone wrong long before he opened his mouth. "What's going on here?" he asked, glancing between the two officers and Danielle. One of the younger officers started to explain, but his voice wavered. "We stopped him because he matched the description of a suspect." Danielle cut in, her tone even but firm. "A suspect? What description exactly? And who authorized you to detain a minor without notifying his guardian?" The supervisor looked at her credentials, his expression changing the moment he realized who she was. "Special Agent Harris," he said quietly, recognizing her name from interagency briefings. He had heard of her before. Her work, her professionalism, her reputation for being fair but never backing down when she sensed injustice. Danielle didn't gloat or raise her voice. She simply looked at him, waiting for an explanation that didn't come. Jordan stood beside her, watching everything, still breathing heavily. He had never seen his mother like this before. Not angry, not yelling, but powerful in a way that made even armed officers look unsure. The crowd behind the police tape grew a little. Someone whispered, "That's his mom." Another said, "She's some kind of federal agent." Phones recorded quietly from a distance, though Danielle didn't pay attention to that. She cared only about her son and about the truth. The supervisor gestured to one of the officers. "Let's talk over here," he said. Danielle followed, refusing to be left out of a conversation about her child. They stepped aside just far enough for the conversation to stay private, but not so far that Jordan couldn't see her. "Ma'am," the supervisor began, "I want to start by apologizing. I'm sure this has been stressful. It looks like there's been some confusion about an earlier report." Danielle crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Confusion doesn't give anyone the right to treat my son like a criminal," she said. "He's 16. He was walking home from practice. There's no excuse for this." The supervisor nodded. "You're right," he admitted. "We received a call about a break-in earlier today." The description was vague, a young male in dark clothing carrying a backpack. It was careless of the responding officers to assume. Danielle's voice softened slightly, but her words stayed sharp. "So a vague description was enough to stop my son, question him, and make him feel like his life was in danger." The supervisor didn't try to defend them. "No, it wasn't," he said quietly. "And I'll be filing a report about this." "I'm truly sorry." Jordan watched from a few feet away, his hands now resting on the straps of his backpack. He saw the officers who had stopped him standing together near their car, whispering nervously. For the first time, they looked uncertain, like they understood what they had done. One of them avoided his eyes completely. Danielle turned back toward them. "You should be," she said, "because one day this could be someone else's son. And maybe next time his mother won't get here in time." Her words hung in the air, heavy and honest. Even the onlookers went silent for a moment. The supervisor cleared his throat and nodded. "Understood, ma'am." Then more gently he added, "Is your son okay?" Jordan hesitated before answering. "I think so," he said softly. "Just scared." Danielle placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice lowering. "You did everything right," she told him. "You stayed calm. That's what matters." The tension started to ease as the officers began packing up their things. The lights dimmed and the sound of radios faded. But the emotional weight of what happened stayed heavy in the night air. A woman from the crowd, one of the neighbors, stepped forward and called out, "We saw everything." "You did nothing wrong, sweetheart." Jordan gave a faint, grateful nod, though he didn't quite know what to say. Danielle thanked the woman politely, then turned back to the supervisor. "I'll need your incident report number," she said, her voice professional again, "and I'll be filing a formal complaint. I expect full transparency." He nodded, scribbling the information down and handing it to her. "Of course, Agent Harris. You'll have full access to the body cam footage as well." "Good," she said. "That's how we make sure this doesn't happen again." After a long pause, the supervisor looked at her with genuine respect. "You handled this with grace," he said quietly. "Most people would have yelled. I can see where your son gets his strength." Danielle didn't respond right away. She just looked back at Jordan, who was staring down at his shoes, lost in thought. The fear that had once filled his eyes had turned into something else, a quiet understanding that the world was not always fair. But that truth still had power. When they finally got into their car to leave, the adrenaline began to wear off. The street behind them looked peaceful again, almost like nothing had happened. But inside the car, the silence was thick. Jordan stared out the window for a while before saying softly, "Mom, I really thought they were going to take me." Danielle glanced at him, her heart tightening. "I know, baby," she said. "And that's why I came as fast as I could." He nodded slowly. "If you didn't show up, what would have happened?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached over and held his hand. "You don't have to think about that right now," she said gently. "You're safe. That's what matters tonight." But even as she said it, she knew she couldn't stop thinking about it herself. She'd seen enough in her years of service to know how quickly things could go wrong. When they pulled into their driveway, the porch light was still on, casting a warm glow over their front door. Danielle sat for a moment, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "You know," she said quietly, When I was your age, my mother used to tell me that sometimes the world will see you before it listens to you. And that means you have to stand taller, speak clearer, and know your worth before anyone else tries to define it. Jordan nodded, trying to take it in. I think I understand now, he whispered. She smiled faintly, though her eyes looked tired. Good, she said. But don't ever forget, it's not your job to make people comfortable with who you are. It's their job to treat you with respect. He gave a small smile in return. You're like the strongest person I know. Danielle laughed softly, the tension finally easing. Strong doesn't mean fearless, she said. It just means you keep standing even when you're shaking. They went inside, the familiar scent of home wrapping around them like a blanket. Jordan set his backpack down by the door and looked around the living room. Everything just as they had left it earlier. The folded laundry on the couch, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the quiet ticking of the wall clock. For the first time that night, it felt like the world was still. Before heading to bed, Danielle sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop and began typing up a report of what happened. Every detail, every exchange. It wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. About making sure no other parent would get a call like the one she had gotten tonight. Jordan peeked in from the hallway. You're still working? She looked up and smiled softly. Just finishing something important, she said. About tonight? She nodded. Yes, about tonight. And what it means. He thought for a moment before saying, You really think it'll make a difference? She looked him in the eye. If we don't try, then nothing changes, she said simply. He nodded again, his expression serious now. Then I'm glad you're trying. As he walked away, Danielle turned back to her screen, typing a few more lines. The words were steady, thoughtful, and full of quiet strength. She didn't just write about what had happened. She wrote about what needed to happen next. Outside, the night grew calm again. The flashing lights were gone, replaced by the faint glow of street lamps and the rustle of trees. But the memory of that moment and the fear, the courage, the shift in power, would stay with both of them for a long time. And though Danielle knew there was still work to do, she also knew that something powerful had begun, not just for her son, but for everyone who had watched and realized that change doesn't always start with shouting. Sometimes it starts with one person standing firm, speaking truth and refusing to let fear win. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, painting soft patterns across the table. The night before had felt endless, but now, the quiet hum of the house brought a strange kind of peace. Jordan sat at the table, staring into a bowl of cereal that had long gone soggy. His mother moved around the kitchen, fixing her coffee the same way she always did. 1 spoon of sugar, a little milk, and 2 deep breaths before that first sip. Neither spoke for a while. There was comfort in the silence, though beneath it, both were still processing what had happened. Finally, Jordan broke it. Are you still mad? He asked softly. Danielle looked up from her cup, her expression gentle. Mad? No, disappointed, yes, but not at you. He nodded, stirring his cereal just to have something to do. It just doesn't feel real. Like it happened in a dream or something. It's real, she said quietly, and that's what makes it hard. Jordan looked at her, his voice barely above a whisper. Did I do something wrong? That question hit her harder than she expected. She set her coffee down and came to sit beside him. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong, she said. You were walking home from practice. That's all. You have every right to do that. He looked down. Then why did they stop me? Danielle hesitated, searching for the right words. Sometimes, she said slowly, people make decisions based on fear, not facts. They see what they expect to see instead of what's in front of them. He nodded, not fully understanding but trying to. She could see the question still lingering behind his eyes, the same question countless parents have struggled to answer for their children. Later that day, the house phone rang. Danielle answered, her tone formal as she recognized the voice of the police chief. The call was brief but sincere. He apologized for the officer's behavior, promised an internal review, and asked to meet in person. She agreed, not for herself, but because she wanted accountability to mean something. When she hung up, Jordan was standing in the doorway. Was that them? She nodded. Yes, the police chief wants to talk. He frowned. What are you going to say? The truth, she said simply. A few days later, Danielle drove to the precinct. the same department whose flashing lights had filled her son's eyes with fear just nights before. She walked in with quiet confidence, her posture straight, her heart steady. Inside, the chief greeted her with a handshake that carried a mix of respect and guilt.